popularized by video games such as the Total War franchise and such shows as The Last Kingdom and the Vikings TV show. The shield wall has become very fantasized and popularized within modern media. But what actually was the shield wall, and what was it actually used for? Well, I'm ShieldBro6, and I will be your guide with this weekly dose of history as we discuss the shield wall, how it was really used. The wall, or the Skildwalla in Old English, or Skjaldborg in Old Norse, is a military tactic that was common in many cultures in the pre-early modern warfare age. There were many slight variations of the tactic among these cultures, but in general, a shield wall was a, wall of shields formed by soldiers standing in formation, shoulder to shoulder, holding their shields so that they would overlap and be locked together. Each man benefits from the protection of his neighbor's shield, and usually the man to his right as well as his own, allowing for a solid wall of shields that allowed for a sturdy formation. So in ancient times, this tactic was used by many ancient armies, including the Persian Sparabara, the Greek hoplite phalanx, and the Roman legions with their testudo. This shield wall came into use in ancient Greece during the late 8th or early 7th century BC. So as you see, it's not just Vikings, it wasn't just the Germanic peoples. This had been something that had been used for a long time. And the soldiers in these shield wall formations were called hoplites, and they were named so for their heavy weaponry. These were 3-foot shields made from wood and covered in metal. Instead of fighting individual battles and large skirmishes, the hoplites fought as cohesive units in tight formation, with their shields pushing forward against the man in front. This left room for them to attack with their other arm, and the worst or newest fighters would be placed in the middle so that they would have the most physical and mental security, because you were surrounded by not only a wall of shields, but men who knew what they were doing. For the Roman legions, they used a type of shield wall called a testudo formation, in which the first row formed a dense vertical shield wall, and the back rows held shields over their heads, thus forming a tortoise-like defense, which is what it's named after. And it was nearly impenetrable to missile weapons, which was the goal, as you can see pictured here. The man at the right hand of each warrior had an important role. He covered the right side of the warrior next to him with his shield, and this made it so that all of the shields overlapped and they formed a solid battle line. The second row was their goal there was to kill the second soldier of the first line of the enemy shield wall, or the enemy line, or whatever have you, and then try to break it. While the other rows were wait, so that the pushing match that always occurs when both sides try to break through the wall had more weight to it. So the guys in the back, think of it like a rugby scrum, right? You're pushing from the back, trying to get to your goal. You're locking arms and you're pushing. And the testudo was mainly used for either siege, warfare, or when coming under heavily fire while mobile. And the only reason that this worked is because, as you can see with that front row of shields, they did not have their shields locked on the ground, so this allowed them to keep moving. And when the wall was broken, then you would be able to get in and, do devastating damage to your enemy. In the late Roman army and the Byzantine army, similar formations of locked shields and projecting spears, or the fulcrum, were used, and they were first described in the late 6th century strategicon by the Roman legions, who were typically well trained and often used short stabbing swords, such as their gladius, in the close quarters combat, and they were able to thrust through the cracks in the shields. But that brings us to the early medieval period, the period that we often think of when we think of a shield wall. The shield wall was commonly used in many parts of Northern Europe, such as England, Scandinavia, and Northern Germany. In the battles between the Anglo-Saxons and the Danes, most of the Saxon army would have been the fierce but inexperienced Fyrd, or Fjords, the militia composed of middle-class freemen. However, the shield wall tactics of the day did not require extraordinary skill, being essentially a shoving and fencing match with weapons. However, this was not a commonplace tactic. Despite popular belief, they did not use shield walls a lot. They were basically used to extend the length of the battle. So if you knew that you could your enemy, right? If you felt like you could outlast them, if you could beat them in a game of attrition, or perhaps you knew you had reinforcements nearby who could get to you after a certain amount of time, you would go into either a shield wall or a similar formation to prolong that battle to see if you could gain the upper hand. And a few select warriors, such as Skarls or Thanes, carried heavier weapons and consistently wore more armor, and they would be kind of the line breakers. The shield walls would clash, or the enemy line would clash with your shield wall, and then these heavily armored Thanes, Huskarls, what have you, would then, counter fight from your shield wall to try and break their line. And they were the armored retainers, etc., and these men made up the first 3 ranks of the main wall, and as bodyguards for the high-placed Thanes and royalty, they fought hard within the shield wall. The vast majority of opponents in such battles were armed with spears, which they used against the unprotected legs or faces of their opponents at length, kind of like the phalanx did. They had the reach to their advantage. Short weapons such as the sacks, the short sword, etc., could also be used in the tight quarters of the wall if your line was engaged with another line, for instance. There was limited use of archery or thrown missile weapons occurring in the open stages of a shield wall battle, but they were rarely decisive in their outcome using this archery. The drawback of this shield wall tactic was that once breached, the whole affair tended to fall apart rather quickly. If you can breach the line, you can then cause either an envelopment, a flank, or a rout, or maybe all 3. The relatively lightly trained freedmen gained morale from being shoulder to shoulder with their comrades with this protection, but often fled once it was compromised. Once there was a breach in the shield wall, they would start to break, they would start to run. And it was oftentimes hard to reestablish a defensive line once the line was breached, which was a major disadvantage to this type of warfare. However, the tactic was used at major battles, so it is not safe to say that, it was not used, it was just rarely used. One of the most famous usages was the Battle of Stamford Bridge, where the relatively well-armed Saxon army hit a Viking army unaware, led by Harald Hardrada. The Vikings were not wearing as much armor, having left their mail behind on their ships and wearing only their helmets. And after being caught off guard, they grabbed their shields and they formed a shield wall versus shield wall kind of battle. And once that started to break, they fled in panic, with their king dying in the battle. Both sides lost thousands of men, ranging from 5,000 to 6,000 depending on the account. But the numerical superiority of the English and the element of surprise did catch them off balance. However, the shield wall at Stamford Bridge did prolong the army and the battle, and it made a much tougher battle for the English, and it allowed the Viking forces to last much longer than they would have normally if they hadn't used the shield wall. They formed shield wall on higher ground, and they were able to hold on for quite a while. After that, we also saw this at the Battle of Hastings, in the clearly visible Bayeux tapestry, using this tactic, which I will show you later. Though a combination of Norman mounted cavalry and less experienced Saxon warriors ultimately won the day for the Normans, with the shield wall collapsing, it did again prolong that battle. The Battle of Hastings, on the other hand, lasted for 7 hours. 7 hours. Shield walls, like I said, that was their goal, extending the battle. Most battles of this time period would not last more than an hour. But like I said, on the other hand here, we see the Battle of Hastings last for 7 hours. And it nearly went the other way until William, who was unhorsed twice, then rallied his men and was able to end the battle with breaking the shield wall 15 minutes before darkness fell. Mass shield walls would be employed right up to the end of the 12th century, especially in areas which were unsuitable for large-scale mounted warfare, such as Scandinavia and Scotland, with Scotland choosing to use their schiltrons, which was more of a spear wall than a shield wall, but still had a similar intention of grounding that troops, giving them a solid flank and line, and giving them a good defense against cavalry. So the shield wall, as a tactic, has declined obviously, and it had been resurrected numerous times. For example, in the Greek and Macedonian phalanxes, as the Dori spear gave way to the Sarissa, it became impossible to carry a large shield so it was abandoned. Likewise, in the Middle Ages, the shield was abandoned in favor of polearms, carrying with both hands, giving rise to things such as pike squares, like the Skiltron I mentioned. But it does still carry a sense of romanticism and popularity within modern media. And here is that tapestry I was talking about, where you can see the tightly knit shield wall facing down the Norman cavalry. And I should say that the pike square, which I would consider a descendant of the phalanx and even possibly the shield wall, remained in use on the European battlefields all the way to the 16th and 17th centuries. But with the increasing importance of the handgun and black powder and gunpowder, we did see a decline into more favorable formations such as line and column formations by the 18th. But I do want to point out that though it was used, it was not, again, used, like I said, it was not used as we see on the shows such as Vikings or Last Kingdom. It would have been just a few Roman men prolonging the battle, and, you know, maybe 2 lines, maybe 3 lines at the most. It would not have been these lines and lines and lines of men, because since you'd be immobilized and blinded in this formation, you would get easily overwhelmed or surrounded or outmaneuvered. The Roman testudo was a formation specifically for facing ranged weaponry and in siege warfare, and it was mobile because you did not have that first row of shields locked to the ground. And remember, neither the Danes nor the Saxons, nor really any of the Germanic forces, aside from maybe the Frankish army, had any full-time professional soldiers. So any formations they used had to be simple enough not to require constant large unit training, and it had to be flexible enough that they could react to attacks from the battlefield from different directions, and armies were small at this time. 5,000 men was considered a huge force. So one would always have open flanks because you were facing a smaller force with your smaller force. And in a mobile, complex, blinded formation with more than triple stacked shield walls would simply not work. It would not make sense at this time period. But it was used in situations such as Hastings or Stamford Bridge, and it was still a very important tactic, especially when prolonging. So in the end, how was it used? Rarely, and in order to prolong a battle. But that brings us to the end of today's video. So I hope you enjoyed today, and I hope you learned a little something about shield wall and military tactics. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please hit that like and subscribe button for me. It lets me know what you're enjoying, and it helps me grow my channel. If you ever have a comment, suggestion, concern, or perhaps I got something wrong, just drop that in the comment section down below for me, and I'll get back to you because I do actually read all of your comments. If you ever want to support me further, check out the links in the description of the video. But that is enough from me for today, and as always, I am ShieldBro6 for the History Armada, and I will see you for your next weekly dose of history. Thanks for watching.